Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar on HALT, Risk Mitigation Strategies for TCP/IP Vulnerabilities in OT. I'm Daniel dos Santos, a research manager at Forescout, and today I'm joined by two colleagues, Dan Johnson, Senior Systems Engineer at Forescout, and Shahar Menashe, Senior Director of Security Research at JFrog. And we're going to be talking about the INFRA vulnerabilities that were recently disclosed by Forescout and JFrog, but most importantly, what you can do in your organization to mitigate the effect of these vulnerabilities. So first of all, let's start with a quick introduction. As I mentioned before, I'm Daniel dos Santos. I'm a research manager at Forescout. I have an academic background in computer security, a PhD, and several academic publications, but recently I've been doing a lot of vulnerability research together with a group that I lead at Forescout. And in this past year, we have done a lot of work on TCP/IP stacks, which we are going to discuss today. So, Dan. Yeah.
Hey, my name is Daniel Johnson. Before Forescout, I came from the trenches of controls and networks, maintaining power systems and just trying to keep everything secure and running. And ever since I joined Forescout, I focus on what customers can do with deep packet inspection and how to get value and how to identify risk. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Shahar. Nice to meet you all. I'm currently Senior Director Security Research at JFrog. In my past, I'm a security researcher, hacker, now more of an architect, basically overseeing some security teams, currently at JFrog, and previously I've worked at Vdoo. We recently got acquired by JFrog and working on automated security solutions. So researching new vulnerabilities and then figuring out how to automate them with code analysis techniques, which is what we're building inside JFrog.
Great, thanks so much, guys. So let's move ahead with the presentation, right? So why we have done HALT and what's kind of the context of this talk, right? So in the previous decade, we have seen a growing number and a growing complexity of attacks targeting OT and ICS environments, right? So operational technology and industrial control systems. You can trace back, things started more or less in 2010 with Stuxnet, but there have been several other types of malware and other types of attack, leading all the way, for instance, to recent ransomware attacks targeting manufacturing and oil and gas and other types of utilities around the world, basically, right? So HALT is a set of vulnerabilities that affect a TCP/IP stack that is common in operational technology, and HALT actually stands for infrastructure in HALT. So I just wanted to put this slide up to really give you the context of why this type of research is important, right? It's something that is really happening nowadays, and that attackers are looking into OT and ICS as their end goal. So let's talk a bit about Project Memoria. HALT is a set of vulnerabilities that falls within this umbrella project that we started at Forescout Research Labs. The goal of Project Memoria is to be a comprehensive study on the security of TCP/IP stacks. So we really want to analyze different types of stacks, both open source and proprietary, and understand what are the types of vulnerabilities that they present to devices and what are the challenges that they present in terms of supply chain, and so on, right? So TCP/IP stacks are really these foundational software components and connectivity components of any type of connected device. We will be talking mostly about operational technology devices here, but TCP/IP stacks are also present in IT and IoT and medical IoT and any other type of connected device that you can imagine. Another important aspect of this project is that we have been partnering with universities and industry collaborators. So in this talk, we're joined by JFrog because they did a huge chunk of the work also in this research, right? And we are happy to collaborate with other members of industry. But in the end, our goal really is to educate the community around the vulnerabilities that we find and, of course, suggest possible mitigations. So why does it matter, right? I already mentioned that TCP/IP stacks are foundational components of connected devices, but they really process every single network packet that reaches a device, right? And in many instances of bugs, single network packets can then be used to crash devices or in some extreme cases, even take remote control of a device, right? in the case of remote code execution vulnerabilities. So identifying these vulnerable devices is very challenging because of, as I mentioned before, supply chain issues. These TCP/IP stacks are software components that are produced by one company, but then used by several, potentially hundreds of other companies in the devices that they manufacture. And we're going to show some examples actually throughout this talk. Because of these supply chain issues, fixes, basically patches, right, might take a long time to become available actually to the end users of a device. And in the worst case, large-scale patching is not even feasible because you're dealing with devices from different manufacturers that have different procedures to be updated, or manufacturers that issue patches at different time windows and so on. So basically, doing large-scale patching is really difficult for OT as a whole, and for TCP/IP stack vulnerabilities in OT especially. So this is a bit of a gloomy slide, unfortunately, saying that there's no silver bullet, right, to solve this kind of problem. But really, we're here to talk about how we can mitigate the risk that this type of vulnerability presents. So this will be the focus of the second part of this talk. So if we go a little bit into Project Memoria, this is a refresher for people who may have been following the research before, but it's also a nice introduction to those who don't know about it yet. We released Amnesia 33 in December of last year, and basically that was a set of 33 memory corruption vulnerabilities focusing on open source stacks, and especially the challenges that open source brings to the supply chain issue, right? Then we followed that with Numberjack, a set of 9 TCP initial sequence number vulnerabilities, so basically allowing, in some cases, to hijack TCP connections or spoof TCP connections to devices. And we followed that with NameRack, a set of vulnerabilities in DNS clients that are part of embedded TCP/IP stacks. And finally, now we have released, just a couple of weeks ago at the beginning of August, INFRA, which is this set of vulnerabilities in a TCP/IP stack used in OT. So let's talk about INFRA, what it actually is, and why we should look closer into it. So INFRA is a set of 14 vulnerabilities that affect a TCP/IP stack called NicheStack, also known as InterNiche. InterNiche is the name of the company that originally developed this stack. And they include remote code execution and denial of service, right? So basically, vulnerabilities that can either crash a device on the network or allow for takeover of the device to perform some malicious action intended by an attacker. It's a stack that is popular in OT. So we started this research by looking at vendors that were mentioned as InterNiche customers, and those include some of the names that were mentioned there, like Siemens, Rockwell, Philips, Schneider Electric, Phoenix Contact, and so on. We have, of course, when we found these vulnerabilities, contacted the vendors and contacted them through coordinating agencies such as the ICS cert. Many vendors have already issued their advisories and admitted and looked into the impact of these vulnerabilities in their product lines. Others are still investigating, and we do expect more advisories to come soon. So just to give an example, I mentioned before Amnesia 33, and actually when we disclosed Amnesia 33 in December, it took some vendors more than 6 months, right? So up to June or July this year to actually come up with their advisory. So do keep an eye out. Dan will mention it later on, but we are keeping track of vendor advisories that are impacted by INFRA and other vulnerabilities in Project Memoria. Again, I just wanted to highlight that this is joint original research that was done within Forescout, but also in collaboration with JFrog Security Research. And the disclosure date of INFRA was a couple of weeks ago, as I said, August the 4th. Right, how did we actually find these vulnerabilities? So we did some manual analysis of source code based on knowledge that we had from Project Memoria, and I'm going to discuss in the next slide why that was interesting and important. And we also used JFrog's tools for automated analysis, which includes static and dynamic analysis. So it's just, this slide is a little bit technical, but it's just really interesting for you to understand that this was a combination really of different types of knowledge and different types of expertise within the cybersecurity industry, right? So joining knowledge that we had from Project Memoria with automated vulnerability analysis knowledge from JFrog. So the actual vulnerabilities that make part of INFRA. So we have a set of 14 CVEs, as mentioned before. 2 of them allow for remote code execution, which means that they have a critical CVSS score higher than 9. And one of them affects the DNS client, and the other one the HTTP server. And the other vulnerabilities are mostly denials of service, and we also have two that allow for DNS cache poisoning, which means that an attacker can more easily exploit the DNS vulnerabilities. I mentioned before that it was interesting that this was found as kind of a follow-up of the rest of Project Memoria. So I just want to mention that several of these vulnerabilities are very similar to things that we already disclosed in the past, right? Which means that the mitigation is also similar to that, and then we'll be speaking about that later on in this talk. But also it means that other stacks could be susceptible to this type of vulnerability, which is what we have been saying since the beginning of Project Memoria, right? This is really a living proof of some of the things that we have mentioned since the beginning. Right. I want to briefly go over an attack scenario that this type of vulnerability enables, let's say. So imagine you have a device that is vulnerable to INFRA that is exposed on the network, right? And exposed by issuing DNS requests to external servers. So an attacker can spoof a DNS response to that device and then basically take control of the device to issue malicious requests to other devices within the network and take them down or take control over them and spread malware and so on. So the actual attack scenario that we implemented in our lab and that we describe in our technical report, and we even have a video of it up online on YouTube, basically shows an attacker remotely taking control of a device that is vulnerable to INFRA and using that one to then exploit a vulnerability on an internal POC, a network, a POC that is in an internal network, to then crash that POC and stop a physical process, which in that case is an industrial fan, but it could be like a production line in a manufacturing company or something related to a utility, some OT device in a substation and so on. So really, the attack scenarios that are enabled by this type of vulnerability allow for attackers to use vulnerable and exposed devices as entry points and internal devices as pivot points or to crash the actual operations within the network. And lastly, I want to comment quickly on the supply chain impact that I mentioned since the beginning of this presentation, right? So NicheStack is actually, we talk about NicheStack, but it's a set of products, right? It's a set of different offerings of the same type of source code with different packagings of protocols and versions such as IPv4, IPv6. There's a light version and so on. And those offerings were actually distributed via many distributors for more than 20 years, right? So we have some big names there like NXP and Intel and so on that distributed this to OEMs to use this stack within their products. And then in the end, you have a screenshot from that website that I mentioned at the beginning where we looked at former customers of Interniche or current and former customers of Interniche. And basically this stack, this code ends up in several of those vendors, downstream vendors. So we're not saying that all of the logos that appear on that image there are vulnerable, right? That's up to the actual vendors to come up with their advisories. But several of them are and have already put up their advisories. But you can see that from one product via many distributors, it ends up in potentially hundreds of device vendors. And that's more or less what I have to say. I would like to hand over to Shahar, who will start talking about how we actually can mitigate the risk from this type of vulnerability. So thank you, Shahar.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. So, okay, let's first start talking about what device vendors can do. So first of all, in this specific image, or the NicheStack embedded binaries and source code, all the ones that we've seen, basically there weren't any exploit mitigations in place, which for the two, we've also published it in a white paper about INFRA, but for the two top vulnerabilities, the remote code execution, it was possible to achieve remote code execution. We showed the steps of it. And basically, if exploit mitigations were in place, that would be much harder. And a lot of times, the exploit mitigations just aren't in place because it's not by default in the SDK of the vendor, for example. like the GCC version that is supplied by the OEM doesn't have stack canaries by default. So the first step is really using exploit mitigations. And for example, here, since the top two vulnerabilities were heap overflows, if heap safe unlinking would be used in the C library, or if SLR address space randomization was enabled in the operating system level, it would make it much, much harder to actually exploit these vulnerabilities for remote code execution. You might still be able to crash a device, but that's much more visible and has less impact than code execution. So in this case, there weren't any exploit mitigation. So this is our #1 recommendation. It's very easy to enable, for example, stack canaries if you're using a GCC or some variant of it. And we covered that in the white paper as well. The second one is, of course, using code auditing tools, and that also relates to a question that was asked here, but we'll answer all the questions in the end. But of course, we've demonstrated that even with binary decompilation, even if you just have the binary, you can find these types of vulnerabilities. In this case, there was some version of the source even available publicly. So that could have been used even with a source code scanner. But of course, if you're the vendor, then it's obvious that you should use both static analysis on source code and binary, and both dynamic techniques like fuzzing. So of course, in this case, some of the vulnerabilities were found automatically. So it's obvious that this would solve it. Specifically, what JFrog can offer in terms of mitigation after the CV has been released and it's a well-known issue, then because JFrog, of course, with Artifactory works with binary images and not source code, you can upload your binary image through Artifactory, and then when it gets scanned with X-ray, these types of vulnerabilities, once they're public as CVEs, are determined automatically, and also determined with actually determined with a real risk, because it's being scanned not just if you have the software installed, but rather if the current binary image actually allows for the CVE to be exploited, which is with like proprietary contextual scanning. Then you have two options basically. First of all, we offer a list of mitigation techniques on several CVEs on how to get around them without upgrading. The other way is, of course, we show you the upgrade path that you can upgrade to. And the last thing that can help in this regard is if the configuration, if you can change the configuration in some way to deny the vulnerability or deny exploitation of the vulnerability, then that's also shown. So that's also possible to mitigate that way. DJ.
Thank you guys so much for that research. You know, it's crazy to think how many of these vulnerabilities have been out there that we didn't get visibility into, and definitely appreciate the Project Memoria contributions to that. And now we can start figuring out what to do. So let's start by identifying where you may have these vulnerable assets so that you may consider the potential impacts on your organization. Whether this is a manual or automated task for you, depends on your tooling. We share these two links to help the widest audience, and those with licensed Forescout tools have additional options we'll talk about later. But first active option, is our community available tool. It's the Project Memoria detector script. There's the link. Allows you to scan a network and identify devices with potentially vulnerable TCP/IP stacks. The output, I've seen it myself. It's a human readable, and you can scan either an asset or a subnet at a time. There's a passive option to a degree where we're tracking the vendor related disclosures at this the advisory link. Earlier this week, the list had 43 vendors contributing to our INFRA HALT and other Project Memoria identification. Phoenix Contact, Rockwell, Schneider, Siemens, pills to name those contributors for INFRA specifically. So however you do identify your risk, once you have, then you can prioritize your mitigations. The second technique here, as mentioned, the remote code execution vulnerability is exploited via a malicious DNS version 4 response. You can monitor for the DNS response traffic, which we'll get into later. You can also reduce the exposure of your DNS requests by relying on internal DNS servers on controlled networks. This will also help you with information leakage. Hardening your DNS version 4 servers will reduce your likelihood of DNS cache poisoning. And bad actors observing your DNS version 4 requests, they may attempt to spoof the responding servers with the malicious DNS 4 response. So if you can prevent your vulnerable device from eliciting any DNS version 4 requests, then that exploitation risk goes away. You may have a specific vulnerable device like a network switch where configuring its few outbound destinations by IP address instead of fully qualified domain name, that prevents it from eliciting those DNS version 4 requests. So that's just another way you might be able to mitigate that risk for that asset. Third, if you find a vulnerable inter-niche web server, you can tighten up your firewalls or switch ACLs to limit the HTTP connections to a whitelist of sources. Alternately, if you have other means of managing the device and being a web server, if it isn't a primary function, disable that web server. A few passive options are also available to monitor the HTTP communication to these vulnerable devices. Network segmentation, meaning accept that some of these devices are very hard to patch and secure. And network segmentation offers a different approach to obstructing the threat actor so that they cannot engage your vulnerability. I've implemented network segmentation myself many times, but for me, those were time-consuming projects. I didn't have the tooling to reduce the effort, duration, and downtime. There's definitely a Forescout easy button, and we'll touch on that later. Fifth, patch your devices if possible. You can see that we are going from kind of lower effort at the top to higher effort as we get down. And these are supply chain vulnerabilities. So even though that HCC Embedded, that's the group who acquired InterNiche in a couple years ago, even though they released official patches, your equipment vendors need to provide their own software updates. So once you have identified what can be patched, then you can assess the impact and prioritize and then start to schedule or coordinate a suitable change window if that's the way you're going to solve your risk, reduce your risk. Sixth, when you have the ability to know what normal protocols look like, you gain the option of detecting what malformed protocols look like. This is something for security teams that have already addressed easier, lightweight techniques, and it affords them an early warning system for zero-day protocol exploits and fuzzing activities that rely on malformed packets. And it also allows you to capture the PCAPs of those activities so you can perform your investigation. Clicking there we go. Yeah, so for each of the mentions on the prior slide, Forescout can help, and we can help you do it easier and to scale. So we're going to proceed through each of these topics, with the first one being know what's on your network. So understanding your attack surface begins with asset inventory. How many assets and different vendor model combinations does your team have to secure? Where are they located? Are they changing over time? To find them all, you don't want to be limited to a single technique. And Forescout has over 20 passive and active techniques. SNMP traps will tell us about a device the second it connects. This is a notification from the infrastructure on what just became live. SPAN, deep packet inspection, is a great where you can get it. Keep in mind that east-west traffic between two devices on an edge switch is not going to negotiate up through every core switch or the core switch. If it makes sense for you to deploy SPAN on every switch, that's great. but it's rarely the case. So lean on the techniques that make sense for you, and use a combination in your toolbox. DHCP fingerprints can also be forwarded to us as the device is requesting IP details to communicate on the network. We are receiving all sorts of data that we can use to classify the asset. The iSight policy engine, one of our tools, is simultaneously making decisions as early as these assets are negotiating onto the network. Active scans fill in an important level of detail that is not otherwise available or accessible. I like to imagine myself at a party where I could only listen, and like a passive sensor, maybe waiting for a long time to get to specific details, as opposed to you may be able to just ask the question that you want the answer, which is where active techniques contribute. Forescout has heterogeneous integrations across many different infrastructure vendors, whether it be switching, wireless, routing, firewalls. What those integrations allow us to do is to identify every connected device. This can eliminate your device blind spots for a device that doesn't respond to your active queries, or for devices that do not communicate across the switches you have span. And this capability is called polling the network infrastructure. So with Forescout, you can ensure 100% device discovery, and you have the flexibility to choose techniques that are the most relevant based on your specific network needs and architecture. You can bring it all to a single pane of glass to make it easier for your teams and for your reporting. And we also have the device cloud, which is 13 million device fingerprints. The knowledge gained from this helps us continually enrich our three-dimensional device classification, which is pictured with the pretty charts. It is function, operating system, and vendor and model. That's our three-dimensional classification. The more customers that participate in Device Cloud, the more our research team has to work with. And it allows us to create a taxonomy for the enterprise of things that is all-encompassing of your IoT, IOMT, IT, and OT. We leverage a taxonomy to do multi-tiered auto-classification of devices as they come onto the network, and this allows us to determine things like their function, the vendor, the model, but also wraps a business context around those devices so that we can start to understand what they are to the business and in which trust zone they should reside. So discussing what you can do, we offered a manual tool that you can run to scan networks. We also offer a more scalable, consumable technique to identify the potentially vulnerable devices with our iSight tools, security policy templates. iSight is the core of the Forescout platform that offers most of those active and passive discovery techniques, and also a means for integrations, control, and getting the most of your other Forescout tools. What iSight can do is evaluate the managed and unmanaged endpoints to identify if they have TCP/IP stacks that are susceptible to the INFRA HALT vulnerabilities. This involves parsing HTTP and telnet responses. There's TCP fingerprinting, vendor model, Nmap, unique ICMP queries to identify those TCP/IP stacks. Notably, this tool does not require credentials on any of the endpoints to assess them. You simply load this on the iSight's module interface as part of Security Policy Template 2107. Then you define the conditions and the targets that you want to scan. This is the technique that gives you the most control to identify where you're vulnerable. Now I'm going to speak to our passive-only approach to detecting where you are vulnerable, as well as when you are exploited. Let me grab a drink real quick. Thank you. For this, we leverage INSPECT, our purpose-built tool for deep packet inspection of OT and IoT networks. INSPECT offers a passive sensor. It processes span, looks for details to extract, and asset data, communication details, and threat information. We have released a couple add-ons. We have the device visibility add-on, which lets us know what you have. It evolves frequently, and it can detect some TCP NicheStack. We pair the asset inventory with our CVE database. This is passively matched vulnerabilities, not interrogating assets. We have the threat detection add-on, which can detect malformed DNS detection. And we have our INFRA HALT monitor to detect exploitation attempts against the inter-niche web server. Here's a closer look at the artifacts from the previous slide. On the left is a security policy template. Informing us of the potential vulnerability with high, medium, or low confidence. On the right, we have an example of a detected device, and we also have details into a granular vulnerability. Notice that there's the confidence, there's the problem, there's the attack vectors, a solution, and different references. And all this information is contributed to the Forescout platform. In the previous slide, we identified devices with vulnerable or potentially vulnerable TCP IP stacks related to INFRA HALT. So here's a question for you. Once you identify the risks or vulnerabilities in your environment, how do you implement your mitigation strategy? Does it scale? Say you find these vulnerable HVAC systems and you want to prevent somebody from gaining unauthorized access and shutting them down. You work with your teams and tools, collecting information. You determine how you want things to be and set about making that a reality on a per device basis. Quickly, you realize a backlog of risks that you want to address, and your teams are setting about manually confirming, implementing, and reassessing your controls. With Forescout, much of that logic and process can be built through the unified policy engine. And what that does is it gives the team an ability to batch implement those response plans. Instead of many people doing serial tasks that take days or weeks, you have a policy engine that can achieve it in a few hours across the entire company. So in a traditional IT environment, we have insights into a device's component software. These can generally be patched independently of the operating system, and we have frequent opportunities to take a single system out of service. Maybe patching is on autopilot, or we have dedicated tools for deploying patches and frequently scheduled maintenance windows. With IoT and OT devices, that isn't the case. Patches simply may not be available. There may even be contract or warranty restrictions that prevent you from deploying patches. Another common finding is that maintenance windows don't happen very often, like once a year or every other year. Just because there is a maintenance window, that doesn't mean patches will be prioritized above your other tasks. So when OT systems are down, this means a facility or system is postponing revenue-generating activities. There are queues of things vying for attention in these windows for change, and people and schedules are constrained. Systems need to be recoverable if something goes wrong, and functionality needs to be tested and verified so the revenue-generating process can get back on track. The INSPEC tool can help with your patch deployment planning. You can gain detailed inventory across devices efficiently, and you can see how they communicate and where. And after you complete the patch, you can more readily assess that everything is back to normal or get to the root of a problem by investigating with a network view. However, with all these patching challenges, many network and security practitioners pursue the easier and more forgiving approach, network segmentation. So once you've classified your devices, you can place them into different trust zones. For example, separate your conferencing and collaboration devices from your physical monitoring devices from your lab equipment. They don't need access to the same resources on the network. You can start simple and get as granular as you want over time. We then allow you to create policies to establish their allowed behavior on the network. We make this segmentation process simple via our segmentation matrix, which is the diagram on the right. You can visualize traffic flows between zones, create logical policies so you don't have to create rules in each of your network enforcement tools, and then simulate policies to determine their impact. You can refine the zones and policies in simulation mode before you move to enforcement. and our segmentation policy manager allows you to design and implement IoT segmentation with confidence. And here we have an example of an alert picked up by that threat detection add-on that we spoke to previously. You can detect active exploits in your OT networks, and you can passively monitor those networks for malicious packets. When an alert is raised, you can initiate a response or mitigation with the Forescout platform. And Daniel, would you?
Yeah, so thanks so much, Dan, and Shahar as well for the mitigation discussion. Very interesting, and I think we're definitely going to continue that on the Q&A section. I already see some questions there related to that. So I would just like to close this presentation by giving you some more additional details if you want to know more about these vulnerabilities, know more about the research that we have done, previous research we have done, or how this mitigation works, how Forescout can help you, and so on. You're welcome, of course, to visit forescout.com/researchlabs/INFRA-HALT, and that's where we have a landing page with all the assets related to the INFRA-HALT research, including the technical report, which is the main asset that discusses the vulnerabilities, what they are, what can be done to exploit them, to mitigate them, and so on. We also have a customer FAQ that discusses basically how Forescout helps a little bit more in detail. It's a shorter document as well if you have specific questions. You're free to request a demo regarding INFRA-HALT or anything else that you might be interested in that was discussed in this presentation. And of course, feel free as well to contact the research team at Forescout, so research@forescout.com. And we would love to, take your questions and see how we can collaborate and work further. With that said, I would really like to thank all our speakers again, and I would like to thank the audience for their time. And I would love to take some questions now and move ahead to the Q&A section. Right. So I do see already a first question there, which I think would be for you, Shahar. So wouldn't the source code scanner, if it had been run, have found that weakness? And I think maybe you can expand on that with basically, JFrog's automated vulnerability discovery and so on.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. So first of all, I'm assuming the question was about the specific vulnerability which we showed, which was the one that we showed that was found automatically in the previous slide, which is basically an A2L, so parsing an integer from a network input that goes to a signed comparison and then to a big buffer overflow. So the answer is, of course, depends on the source code scanner, but theoretically, yeah, that could also be found by a source code scanner. Our advantage of doing binary is that sometimes, first of all, you don't have the source, and second of all, it has a lot of advantages like cutting down dead code and things like that. So on that specific type of vulnerability, which is integer overflow to buffer overflow, that's the CWE. It's one of the a bit more complex vulnerabilities. It's not a straight up buffer overflow, but I definitely reckon, I know that we support it obviously, but I definitely reckon then that also some of the source code scanners support it. The thing you have to remember, there's always a fine balance between trying to figure out that the input source is actually coming from user input versus just showing every signed comparison that goes to memcopy afterwards, which might not be attacker controlled. So that's something we're very good at. Obviously I can't say about all source code scanners. I haven't used them, but theoretically, definitely, I think that's possible to find that kind of weakness. There were some weaknesses in the INFRA-HALT that would definitely be more difficult to find in an automated way. For example, the use of bad randomization techniques for the DNS source port and the TXID, the DNS query ID. Those would be more difficult, but some of the denial of service vulnerabilities there and the code execution, yeah, I believe so. The question is, how many false positives are you also getting? Because it might not really come from user input. But yeah.
Okay, that's a great answer. Thanks a lot. And we do have time for some more questions if anybody wants to type the questions in the box there. But I also got another one for DJ now. So can you let us know a little bit more about like network baselining and how could that help with mitigating this type of issue?
Yeah, sure. So network baselining means that you want to track everything that is going on in that network and then create a list of what is okay, and then maybe set it in detection mode and then get notified when there's things that are not okay, right? So with that, I recommend we start with the assets or protocols or networks that are of most interest. And so something that is vulnerable to an INFRA vulnerability, if you've identified that already, and that's a perfect place to start. And you can configure, traffic rules, for example, with our software that you might be looking at just communication to or from that protocol or whatnot. But because we also have that malformed packet checking script, you would see those exploits even without network baselining.
Okay, that's good. I think it highlights the importance of a kind of a holistic detection approach, right? So that's very interesting. All right, I don't see any more questions in the chat. So I don't know, guys, if you want to have any last words, feel free. Otherwise, I think we are okay to close here as well. Cool. So thanks everybody again for joining us, and feel free to contact us and go look for the resources that I mentioned before. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.